Hi everybody and welcome. I am Alex Burns. I am the Director of Discovery at Nesta and I have got 3 jobs at the start of this event this evening. So the first is just to say welcome. So thank you very much for those of you that have come in the room, and also thank you to all of those of you that have joined us online. We're really excited about the evening ahead. Now, the second and potentially the most important job I have is to tell you that there won't be a fire drill. So if it goes off, then that means there is an emergency and you are to leave, I believe, behind the back of here. So we'll be filing out if that happens. My third job is just to tell you a little bit before we start about the event series that we're launching tonight. So last year, Prospect and Nesta launched an experiment, and that experiment was to imagine a minister for the future. It made me feel incredibly excited, and it made me feel excited for 2 reasons. So the first of those is that in government, it was so painfully obvious to me that ministers and political attention is often taken up by the immediate, the problems in front of them, the thing that needs managing that day. And it is so very difficult to get away from that and to lift our heads as policymakers. And so projects like this that force us to do that and to think about the future in a different way, I think are incredibly important. And so it really struck a chord with me. And the second reason I was excited was about the partnership between Prospect and Nesta. So Nesta is focused on designing and testing long-term solutions to some of society's biggest challenges. So that includes net zero, child inequality, and public health. And then with Prospect, you have an organisation known for kind of always championing the big ideas across the political divide. So that partnership to me felt really exciting. So I'm excited. I think you guys probably are too, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And what we want to do with this event series is delve a little bit deeper into the themes that we started exploring with the magazine supplement. And we'll kick off tonight with exploring the challenge of the Anthropocene diet. Now, I've been learning to say that word all day. I don't know whether I got it right or not, but the important thing is these guys on our panel will tell you a bit more about what it actually means. So over to Alan Rusbridger, editor of Prospect, to introduce the panel.
Thanks so much, Alex, and we're really thrilled to be working with Nesta on this. Now, the conceit this evening is that you are collectively the minister for the future, and you're going to have to vote at the end. And we have amazing future-facing technology that probably won't work. But if it doesn't work, then we'll have a show of hands. But you're going to be in the driving seat. And I'm going to introduce, first of all, Thomasina Miers to come and talk about the piece that she wrote in the magazine supplement that we produced. Thomasina is a business leader, a food writer, a chef. She co-founded Oaxaca. You've all eaten at Oaxaca. It's a wonderful food and restaurant. Has won numerous awards for food and sustainability, and her credentials in that area are widely known. And the whole restaurant group has gone carbon neutral, and half of its food is vegetarian. That's right. And she helped set up chefs in schools. So, Thomasina, come and join us here. And while you're doing that, the other 2 people we're going to be hearing from in a bit who will be responding to Thomasina are Dr. Tara Garnett there, who's director of Table at the University of Oxford, which is a platform for dialogue and debate about the future of food, and Prospect's very own Tom Martin, who writes a regular column on farming at the back of the magazine. And Tom runs a mixed sheep and arable farm near Peterborough. And he was recently in conversation on regenerative farming with George Monbiot here. So they're going to come up in a bit. But first of all, Thomasina, you wrote this piece. I'm sure everybody has read it, but just in case there's anyone in the audience who hasn't read it, can you give us the condensed version of the argument that you were making?
Sure. So it was basically looking at the role of public procurement to be a powerful lever, a pull to help farmers opt for more nature-friendly farming. So public procurement being the food that we buy through schools, prisons, social care and hospitals. We spend £2.4 billion a year on that. And so there's a huge amount of buying power there collectively that we could use for better food. And when I say better, unequivocally, I'm talking about food that's had less contact with chemicals, that have increasing evidence shows they're not great for our health, having too many chemicals in our food, but we also know them to be disastrous for biodiversity, insect populations, and water pollution, and many other things. Not to mention actually being really carbon intensive. So looking at, and it's interesting, we'll talk more with the panel about how you define regenerative farming, but essentially we're talking about better farming. So farming with nature as opposed to against nature. So we started farming more against nature with the Green Revolution, which was set up post-war with the very noble idea that we weren't self-sufficient as a nation. We weren't able to feed our populations. And so this discovery that we could start putting nitrates on our fields and using different chemicals to help with weeds and funguses, and was kind of developed and helped this amazing explosion of crop yields. But it has come at a real cost, and the costs have come on two different sides of a coin. One, the cost has been really at the expense of human health. So a lot of the four main crops actually that go into most of the foods we eat, most of the ultra-processed foods we eat, particularly in this country, our diet's the worst in Europe and the UK, so 57% of our shopping basket is ultra-processed. That largely comes from four main crops, which are farmed in a monocrop kind of system. Like we've got soy, we've got corn, we've got wheat, and rice as well. But these crops are kind of processed to within an inch of their lives, and we eat them. And now our diet is killing us more than smoking, it's killing us more than alcohol. And it's estimated that our poor diet in this country costs the economy £74 billion a year alone. So that's a huge cost. And we've seen that lag in the economy due to long-term sickness, which is largely attributable to diet-related disease. We've seen the terrible sickness that's caused on people and the damage. And we're seeing in real time the cost of that on the NHS and the strain that the NHS is being put under. It's estimated that just treating type 2 diabetes by 2035 will cost more than treating all of the cancers combined. So we are in a health epidemic, but we're also in a climate and nature epidemic where the species decline and the biodiversity decimation, which we know is largely caused by food production, has alarmed many scientists, and I think most of us know quite a lot about that. It's kind of in the public sphere.
That was a very crisp summary of what you wrote. I realised that there was one thing I failed to say at the beginning, which is that because we've got people online, and if they want to use subtitles, there are closed captions which can be accessed via the LinkedIn live stream. So, so please use that if you want. So you've outlined what needs to happen. You've got the minister in front of you here. How would you advise the minister to make it happen?
So the actual proposal was let's shift 50% of our public procured goods to regenerative by 2035. And we can learn many things from other countries. So in Denmark, they famously did an experiment like this by shifting 30% of their public procured foods to organic. And one of the reasons they did this was because they had such an issue with water pollution. Their rivers were very contaminated, and they thought this should help that. And in fact, they put a kind of framework in place that really enabled the success of this program to happen. So one of the things they did was they set up a very clear labelling system around what regenerative is. And that is quite a kind of flashpoint for people. Like, do you label regenerative or don't you? Because regenerative for one farming system might be slightly different for a different farming system. So already there are a few issues about how you label it, but we definitely need to create a label for better food. What is better food? Because for one person, it might not be the same as another person. But we also need, I would argue, a better skilled workforce. So in Chefs in Schools, which we set up 5 years ago, we identified a real issue, which was that school food was really, really bad. In fact, in secondary schools, at least 2/3 of schools were failing their basic school food standards. We have school food standards, we just don't meet them. Neither are they a priority for the Department of Education. That food isn't even measured in Ofsted reports. So that the food that we give our children isn't considered sufficiently important. And so with Chefs in Schools, we thought we should try and address that. And we realised that putting one trained, skilled chef into a kitchen could transform the way 600 children felt about food and ate food and thought about food. So that was a very efficient model. And we've been in 100 schools to date. And we've got very high ambitions to be in 1/3 of schools through various different means in the next kind of 10 years. So we have proved that the model is doable. And in fact, in Denmark, they came up with the same conclusions. If they could train their workforce in the prisons, the hospitals, the schools, actually not in schools, because in Denmark, largely you take in your own school food, but in social care and prisons and hospitals, then you've got that ability to cook with better ingredients, more affordable ingredients, and make them delicious. So Chefs in Schools has never spent more than the big contract caterers did on their food, but they've had much better food on the plates. And I could show you images of the most delicious, wonderful food that the kids lap up that's much better for them. But the cost when we started was 50 pence per pupil per day less than the beige food that was creating the health crisis that we know about. So it's perfectly possible to feed people better food. But of course, you've got to know what to do with different ingredients. And when I talk about different ingredients, we're going back to that diet, the Anthropocene diet that you so well pronounced. What did we used to eat? What did our forebears used to eat? In most indigenous communities, meat was always a special treat. It was something that you struggled to attain, and you might be lucky. You might suddenly catch a fish, or you might suddenly manage to kind of snook a kind of wild partridge, and then happy days. But for the rest of the time, you were eating pulses and legumes and all sorts of fruit and vegetables, and that was the mainstay of your diet. So it feels to me that government is petrified about lecturing to us about what we should eat. And yet, as grown-ups, it should be fairly simple for us to look back, even as far as my grandparents and probably younger people, their great-grandparents, what they used to eat. And it wasn't very much meat. And it was a much larger percentage of fruits and vegetables and legumes and grains.
Where do you think public opinion is in this country on this? Is this regarded as a woke issue? I mean, you mentioned it was water in a way that shifted public opinion in Denmark.
Yes.
Where do you think public opinion is here, and what would it take to shift it? Because I know the minister will be very concerned about public opinion.
Very concerned about public opinion. And interestingly, I think public opinion has really shifted on this. So you mentioned water. We really care about water in this country now, thanks to Fergal Sharkey and a few other people. But, Fergal's done a great job to make us care about our rivers. I think food has become a flash issue too. Not in the sense that some far-right kind of neoliberals will say, well, you can't lecture me about how many Kit Kats I eat. I love eating kind of, Boost bar or a packet of kettle chips. I'm not saying let's take away our fun and pleasure. I'm a cook. I exist for fun and pleasure. That's what I do for a living, is cook delicious food. What I am saying is that we care about our health. We care that the food we're eating that people have told us is perfectly acceptable, that food is killing us. It's making us sick. It's making our children sick. It's making our children obese and giving them shorter life circumstances and outcomes than our generation. So I think we're beginning to feel radicalised and angry about this. How come this food, which you said was so acceptable, is actually no longer, I don't think, first of all, can we call it food? Because if you look up the definition of food in the dictionary, it's food that is nutritious by its own virtue, and arguably a lot of the food stuff we're talking about has no nutritional value. Secondly, is it even safe? You know, if it's causing so much ill health, can you deem that safe?
And I know I've been talking to the minister before this meeting, and I mean, there's always the sense that science and technology, they've helped us from the problem where we were worried whether we could feed enough people in the world, and they've got a long way along the route of being able to solve that problem. Are we foolish in believing that science and technology isn't an equal part of the solution as to what the things that you've been talking about?
I am all for science and technology. My favourite read of last year was a book by Merlin Sheldrake, which was all about the chemistry, biology, physical nature of what makes up soil, for which we know nothing. 1% of our knowledge so far. 99% of it, we don't know anything about what goes on the soil. So I think let's use as much science we can to understand better the mechanisms of the microcausae and the bacteria and the phytoplasms and all those kind of organisms and microorganisms that exist within the soil that make up this magical process that is photosynthesis. So let's definitely use that. Let's use technology to put these amazing nimble robots that can travel and roam around fields and really identify fungus before we've spotted it and be able to do something about that. There's a farmer called Andy Cato, who's a regenerative farmer, who is really fascinated if you have dead soil, and we are really nuking our soils in the way we farm, so you can kickstart the regeneration of soil with tiny, minute precision applications of nitrates, so that it doesn't drown out the natural process. If you put too many nitrates on soil, the soil kind of gets lazy. It's like, oh, it's already being done for me. So it stops that whole mechanization, and it stops that whole biology that's going on in the soil. If you use precision amounts on virtually dead soil, you can kickstart that process. So I think I'm all for using science and technology to help, but let's look at a holistic look at soil and not have the very human tendency to be rather arrogant about nature and presume that we know so much about it, because that so far has got us in a real mess. And there are all sorts of people who are saying, don't worry about it, we can feed the populations on this lab precision fermented foods. Great that people are devising how to make an egg from tiny egg cells or a burger out of minute meat cells. But do we know what these foods do to us? Because look at what ultra-processed foods have done to us. That is a result of science and technology going, look at this. We can just, we can monoculture, we can spray, we can grow huge yields. Oh, look, we're killing all our soil. We've killed all the microorganisms in the soil. And guess what? This food's not very healthy either. So I think with all science and technology, let's just caution it with a bit of humility that nature in itself has a lot of the answers.
What role has business got in all this?
I think business is nimble and it can work faster than government. I mean, Minister, you're obviously very bright, and I totally agree that we should listen to our populations. And I'm very excited that I think people are feeling angry about the food that is in schools, about the food in hospitals. My father's in hospital recently, and he said the food was literally inedible. And I would love to show a picture of the ingredients of a packet of sausage and mash that a friend of mine found in a private ward that had 63 ingredients, 3 cases of palm oil, 4 different levels of sugar, and about 8 E numbers. So that's the type of food we're feeding people that we think is okay. Minister, people are becoming alive to it. And there are 2 main things this government have got in their 5 kind of missions at the moment. One of them is to fix the NHS, and one of them is to fix the economy. You can't do either of those without fixing the food systems. But business is more nimble. So for instance, Oaxaca, I was able, as a director and in charge of the food, to say, let's just put more delicious vegetables on our menu. Let's not lecture anyone about it, but let's just make some really delicious choices for people. Another thing we've done recently is we've really played around with one of our beef tacos, and instead of using just one cut, a skirt steak that was very popular and very delicious, we're now experimenting with using half of a whole carcass of an animal, which allows us to absolutely identify where that cow is coming from. and it enables us to buy directly from a farmer who we know is doing the right thing by nature, by kickstarting the kind of whole natural process in his soil and on his farm again. So I think we can listen to the public, we can tell stories, and we can produce really delicious things for people to eat.
Final question before we invite the responders up. What are the mistakes that you've seen politicians make in this area? What would your advice be the minister to avoid doing?
Well, Minister, if I may, the biggest problem with food is, and why I love it so much, is it touches everything. Food is our life. It's public health. It's mental and physical health. It's pleasure. It's education. It's the economy. And yet, none of our departments in government wholly owns or holds food. And so it's very easy to either pass the buck or think that's not in my stratosphere. I can't do anything about that. So what we need is an independent committee. And I would argue that the FSA, the Food Standards Agency, is the perfect body to assume a crossbench, cross-party powers, just like the Independent Committee for Climate Change, because we know that food is the biggest driver of biodiversity loss. We know that it is accounting for 33% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So we can solve so many of our climate issues by tackling how we produce food in the food systems. But we have to give someone the great authority to do that. And it has to be above all departments and across all our parties. And so that was the one thing that we haven't got right so far, and it's the one thing I would argue for.
Thank you so much, Thomasina, for that brilliant way of framing the yeah, please applaud. Yeah. And Tara, if you can come up next, and Tara and Tom come up, and then I can ask you each to respond in 3 or 4 minutes to what you've just heard and anything else that you want to introduce into the debate. So, Tara, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so, I mean, broadly speaking, I agree with pretty much everything you say, but my job as a researcher at a university is to kind of say yes, but, and what about that, and be a bit awkward. So I'm going to do that. And so I thought I'd start by just exploring this idea of regenerative farming, which is very fashionable, and it has this, the word regenerative is, of course, kind of very emotionally engaging, and the idea that we can restore, rebalance, harmonise our relationship with the natural world has enormous appeal. But Thomasina's already mentioned the fact that it hasn't yet been defined as a concept. It's a kind of galvanising mantra at the moment, and everyone wants a bit of the regenerative pie because it looks good. So on the one hand, you have your small-scale, fairly alternative farmers who see regenerative farming as part of a wider required and necessary transformation of the food system. And on the other hand, you have some of the very large corporate players who are saying we can do everything that we already do, but we're going to just do it regeneratively. And so the risk there with regenerative agriculture is that it becomes co-opted by different stakeholders, by different players, and perhaps greenwashed. And the question of a definition, that's a really difficult one, because I think for many, including within the sort of dark green alternative movement, they would say, don't pin me down with a definition. As soon as you define something, you kill it. And at the heart, the essence of regenerative agriculture is to be sort of experimental and context specific, and therefore not be kind of confined by a list of prescribed practices. But on the other hand, as I have said, what you get ultimately is a kind of regeneratively produced Oreos and Nesquik and Kit Kat and all the rest of it. And all those kind of promises are they don't come to pass. It's just the same old, same old. I think the other thing to point about regenerative agriculture is that it is as yet, perhaps because there's a lack of definition, the purported benefits, there isn't really an evidence base for them. So that it lends itself to some really, really extravagant claims about drawing down all this carbon from the atmosphere. And again, it gives rise to things like, we don't need to change the system because look, our soils can just draw down all this carbon. It also gets into the kind of the debates around the role of livestock and meat eating, and the necessary reduction in high-income countries in our meat and dairy consumption. And there's a lot of kickback from that within the many in the regenerative agriculture movement who argue that actually livestock are nutrient recyclers, that look at Britain, it does grass, we're good at grass. And somehow then you jump into this kind of dichotomous thinking that if we don't have animals, then we are all going to be injecting ultra-processed foods into our veins the vegan way. So you get this kind of very polarized thinking about food, with livestock as this kind of touch point for, focus of lots of contestation. So I think the point I would make about regenerative agriculture is that people from different positions pull and push it in different directions to advance their visions, but also their interests, that it is not going to get us out of our food system problems on its own, that we have to address issues of consumption, and that means really substantially reducing our consumption of animal products alongside lots of other things that we need to do. Reduction doesn't mean elimination. So again, let's not get into that false dichotomy. And then on the question you said about where are the public on this, if you ask the public, they are a bit kind of, don't tell us what to eat. On the other hand, if you ask them about their children, they are going to be, don't feed my children crap. And the point of leaders is to lead. And we don't have that at the moment. And we are at a crisis point when it comes to climate, biodiversity loss. As Thomasina has said, food sits at the heart of all these challenges. We are going to have to do difficult things, and we need to totally restructure the food system. We need to do that through shifts in our farming, but we have to do it hand in hand with changes in consumption, because the final point I'd like to make is that in some renditions of regenerative agriculture, with this emphasis on nature-friendly farming, that can come at the cost of yields. Now, if we are going to shift our consumption patterns to be less wasteful, less land and resource intensive, and that means, as I say, less meat, then you give a bit and you take a bit, and then the land base can accommodate that kind of reduced yields because we're not placing so much pressure on it. But if we farm in a nature-friendly way but don't do anything about our consumption patterns, we're simply going to export the problem overseas, and that will mean more land use change, more biodiversity loss, more deforestation in other parts of the world whose biodiversity is perhaps even more vulnerable and fragile than it is in the UK, which again underlines this emphasis, this need to address the production and the consumption issues in tandem. I'll stop there.
That was brilliant, Tara. Big hand for Tara. Thank you so much. Tom, you're free to respond to anything you've heard so far, or you can strike out on your own.
Thank you.
With your own pitch.
I'll do a little bit of both. Well, that was a lot there to take on board, and I scribbled some notes away, and Tara, that was really, really helpful to kind of have that critique. But I just want to pick up on a few points. I'm a farmer, so you're getting the on the ground viewpoint here. But a couple of things. I think that it's worth just looking at our definitions and the way we use terminology. When we talk about ultra-processed, I think that doesn't mean things have lots of ingredients, and it's sometimes difficult to work out exactly what we mean. Ultra-processed would probably mean lots of E numbers and lots of other things that stabilizers and preservatives. But actually, just because you've got a lot of ingredients, as a lot of kind of Asian food would have, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. So I think we've got to be very careful when we talk about processing, although the spirit of, I think, what we're talking about, I think we're probably all in agreement with. And I'm also a little bit nervous about nutrient poor as well. So I think a lot of our food inputs I don't think we've seen a loss of nutrition. I think we've seen a loss of, we're nutrient poor in our diets, which is i.e. what we're actually putting into our mouth, rather than what we're starting off and putting into the foodstuffs. And if you follow James Wong, he's always got something to say about that, and probably would say it better than I do. I thought what I'd do, Alan, is just if it would be helpful to offer a 2-minute definition of regenerative farming, because that was one of the difficulties that we have. And I'll also, as I do that, if you set your watch, Alan, I'll explain why on our farm we adopt those principles. And I didn't set out to become a regenerative farmer. It's the cool thing at the moment. I've never been cool. I've never intended to be cool. And actually the 5 pillars we adopted on our farm, all on their own merit and all for their own reasons. Sorry for you, those of you, I'm leaning over my shoulder. So if you've got 2 minutes, Alan, we'll do that. Pillar number 1 is reducing tillage, not eliminating tillage, reducing tillage. When we stop tilling the earth, we don't lose our worms that we lose, which are a great kind of ecosystem architects, and we preserve those worm passages and also the roots of previous crops, which helps our drainage. It also, when we don't till, we don't lose nutrients, which is really important. We keep them in the soil. When we churn the soil up, actually, we end up capping the soil, and we end up with more flooding, which it seems a little bit counterintuitive, but you do that when you mix up the soil, you lose that structure, and so we can lose our nutrients. And of course, when we churn up the soil, we release carbon, and we don't want to be doing that. So we decided to reduce tillage, pillar number 1. Secondly, pillar number 2 is to have diversity. And diversity is so important in all areas. And that means not just growing the same crop year after year after year, but having a diverse rotation so that our soils can feast on the different crops that we're growing. I think it's important in what we eat, but also important for our soils as well. And that doesn't mean we just grow different crops year after year, but also we grow multiple crops in the same field alongside each other and harvest them together. Or we plant species that will actually help our crops. We'll put a legume in with a wheat crop to help it fix a little bit of nitrogen and mitigate some of the artificial fertilizers that we need. And we also make sure that there's diversity in our margins in our hedgerows as well. So we really embrace that pillar on its own merit. Pillar number 3, how am I doing? 60 seconds, okay,
yeah.
Is living roots. It's really important to be maintaining living roots in the ground all the time. When in the States, we'll plant soybeans in May and then harvest them in October. There's then a whole area of the year where there's nothing growing. And the same in the UK, if we harvest in August and we don't plant until October, November or the following March, there's a lot of bare ground. It's really important that our soil is alive, the ecosystem is continuing. If you had a solar panel, you wouldn't turn it off in August and September. It's really important we have greenery there ready to intercept that light. And it really keeps the soil alive. Number 3, living roots. Number 4, and actually moving on to that, is soil armour, protecting our soil. We have those living roots there all the time. We use crops that we don't harvest, that we call cover crops, that just do good for the soil ecosystem. And what do? They actually protect the soil as well. The temperature of exposed soil might get up to 50 degrees on a hot summer's day, but underneath our green cover it might be 25 degrees. And at 25 degrees, life is just about getting on okay. At 50 degrees, there's nothing happening at all, and that's right the way throughout the ecosystem. But equally, when we protect our soils, the impact of raindrops, the physical impact of raindrops, especially through the winter, can cause a micro-sorting of our soils, and we end up with all the fine bits of soil on the top, which caps the soil, stops any oxygen getting in, and carbon dioxide and all our gases circulating, and can actually cause a cap, and so we get flash flooding because the water can't get in either. So soil armour, pillar number 4. And pillar number 5 is to incorporate livestock. And I want to come into land here, because really what we're doing with regenerative farming is mimicking nature. When we look around the world at where the deepest, richest, healthiest soils are, they're beneath the savannas and the steppes and the plains, the prairies. And before, when we got to North America, there were meters deep, this amazing kind of humus, fantastic. And we've done some terrible things there. But it's the passage of livestock and the movement of our megafauna, which actually helps to build up that ecosystem. So when we're planting crops during the winter that protect the soil, instead of just spraying them off, we'll graze sheep across there, which will help not only convert the vegetation into manure and urine, but actually there's an amazing gut soil interaction. It's really important that the gut of our grazing megafauna, our sheep and cattle in this country, interact with the soil. And there's research coming out showing that just the saliva of our grazing animals actually stimulates our grasses to grow. It's quite amazing, but really it kind of comes back to mimicking nature, and that's what we're about here. I think with that definition, farmers understand what regenerative farming is. And I think when our consumers understand that we're helping to improve the soil, to focus on air and water quality, to hopefully combat climate change, to improve the ecology and to improve the nutritional benefit to us as humans, and also the mental health benefit, I think the consumers get it as well. But I think in the middle there are corporations, and we need to be sure that they're not going to steal it. There's also government. We need to make sure that the government isn't going to stifle it. So I think it's a great question. It's an amazing thing to be thinking about. It's so exciting. And we're really mimicking nature. The Green Revolution shouldn't have been called the Green Revolution, because now we're in the Green Revolution. And rather than looking back at the Stone Age for our diets, we're really in the golden age of farming, where farming and land use really it has all the answers to the questions that we as society are asking. It hasn't been that exciting to be a farmer for the last 50 years, but right now it really is exciting. And I meet groups of farmers across the UK and I say, now is the golden era.
Big hand for Farmer Tom. While you're talking, Farmer Tom, I'll call you Farmer Tom to distinguish you from the other Tom on the panel. I mean, you've got the minister here, and I'm sure the minister will have found a lot of that inspiring in the way that I did. But what's the minister supposed to do in terms of speaking directly to farmers? What should the minister be telling farmers to do, or is that not going to work? Are there going to be other kinds of incentives that you need?
I think the great revolutions that Thomasina, such as that Thomasina is proposing, come from the ground up. And I heard Lord Benyon speak today at another event, and he said the mistake of governments is to think that they can do all this from the top. The way to do things is locally. But I think there's a huge amount that can be done to really kind of grease the wheels to oil the regenerative movement. We have separate. That's why I'm so excited about Nesta, because we have separate departments. But actually, what I'm talking about on our farm is as much about health as it is about nutrition, and we do a lot with education as well. We have various different projects, and I'm really excited about Chefs for Schools, because we're overlapping into education as well. I was looking at some of the budgets. We have a National Health Service with a 182 billion budget. But we have our Natural Health Service, which runs through DEFRA, which has a 4.6 billion budget. But a lot of what we're doing, the Venn diagram, there's a huge amount of overlap. And that's why I'm really excited to hear more about kind of Nesta and what's going on to bring people together. If you're in DEFRA, you're part of the solution. But if you look at your health and education and other colleagues, they're part of the solution as well. And that's why it's good to have so many different stakeholders in the room.
Tara, you looked as though you wanted to jump in on that.
Yeah, I have a few comments. So the kind of the key, the 5 core practices are associated with regenerative agriculture. They are well established and farmers sort of pick and mix a little bit among that. I mean, I've met regenerative farmers who say, yeah, I till because you get weed built up, and that's one of the things. And I think what we also know is that among some within the regenerative movement, herbicide usage also goes up. They spray with glyphosate to get rid of the herbs. So, and some of the evidence, we also know that tilling releases carbon into the atmosphere, so you're perturbing the soil. But what we don't know is whether no tillage actually leads to greater sequestration over time, or whether it just kind of redistributes organic matter is not the same as carbon, because organic matter is a little bit more labile, whereas carbon, it's got to be locked in and stay there for a long, long time. So my bigger point is around livestock. And again, I'd just like to underline the point that this is not an argument for eliminating livestock altogether. I really, really see the need to reintegrate cropping and livestock production, which we have separated at our cost. But I think there isn't any such thing as a free lunch. One of the reasons why the Haber-Bosch process was developed was because we were running out of fertilising capacity as a result of our livestock. So you either borrow nutrients by importing feedstuffs from overseas. That's why we get our soy. 80% of the soy that is consumed in the this country passes through an animal first. It's in the form of feed. It's not the tofu that you're eating. So you're also bringing nitrogen into the country that way, or you're synthesizing it from the sky, or you're using these rotations, and that's really valuable. But I'd just like to point out that Britain is the least forested country in Europe. And you were talking about the kind, well, you were perhaps alluding to, or I was imagining that you're alluding to the kind of the bison roaming the plains of Central America, where grassland is the native ecosystem. It's the kind of the baseline ecosystem there. Britain was forest. It's been populated for a very long time, this island. We cut down the trees. We have grass as a result of it. And the grass and our livestock production has led to us to the construction, the creation of landscapes that we know and love. Yeah, I go to Derbyshire and I love to see all the sheep this time of the year and all the rest of it. But they were once forest, and we need more forests in this country. And if we have forests, then the logical consequence of that is fewer livestock. And then we have to think, okay, so how are we going to figure out our diets within that? And I think that leads to the role, consuming livestock at levels that is helpful. The livestock are doing a helpful job in recycling the nutrients, but that will be a lot less than what we currently consume. And it means not importing feedstuffs from overseas. And so I get back to the idea of less, and that the role of livestock really, really has to be limited.
Thomasina, you've had two responses to your original propositions. Is there anything you want to come back on in what you've heard?
Yeah, definitely, especially for the minister, because there's so much information to take on, and I accept that. One thing he will be told by big business is that...
Or she.
She, exactly. The minister will be told by big business is that cheap food plays a very important role in feeding people on low incomes. And again, I would just go back to the experience we have at Chefs in Schools, where if you have a skilled workforce, which is a happier workforce, pay cooks a better wage in hospitals and prisons and schools and social care, they have greater, their staying power is greater, they have great satisfaction, they want to stay in their positions, but they are more nimble when we have these cost of ingredients flashpoints, which we've all seen on the supermarket shelves. So our chefs in our schools are able to be very nimble. They're able to cook with more grains, more pulses, a lot less meat, a lot less fish. They're able to cook to these diets, but still produce delicious tasting and affordable food because they're skilled in that area. They are cooks, they know what they're doing.
Can you just explain for the minister's benefit, because I know she will be asking about this later. They will be asking about this later. And we've heard that this kind of farming is likely to lead to lower yields. Yeah?
Not.
No?
I don't believe that.
Did you not say that, Tara? Did I mishear?
It can do. It can do,
Yeah.
because there is, if you are not ramming the earth with inputs, then it can lead to lower yields. But it can lead to, if you're doing it right, greater resilience over time. So perhaps less fluctuation in yields when it comes to
Well,
drought.
longer term, it leads, I would argue, leads to greater yields, because the way we are farming is destroying our soil structure. We will not be able to grow food in the soil if we carry on farming this way. So we will have zero yields, just like they had like the Mayans had when they ruled.
Can you explain why it's lower cost then? You say schools are able to do this for cheaper than...
Because they're using more affordable ingredients and they're cooking them. So they're using lots of onions and garlic for flavour and spices and pulses and vegetables. And actually, if you look at the cost that the big contract caterers are putting onto schools, they are putting in the cost of tomatoes on the global market. They're passing on the cost of wheat on the global commodity market. Whereas if you are a cook, you go, look at those prices, I'm just going to cook something different. If you're buying in a processed chicken burger or whatever you're putting on your school diet, the cost of that is going to increase, because not only are you paying for the cost of it being prepared in a factory, you're also paying the commodity prices, which you have got no control over. So that's on that thing. If I was a minister, I would also really start focusing on research into soil structures and actually what goes into soil, because there is a discovery of one particular type of fungi that actually eats carbon and turns it into rock. So lots of people question regenerative farming's claims that you can sink more carbon into a soil that has greater kind of porousness and a more aerated structure. There's more of the carbon recycling going through soils that is functioning better. So more carbon is in the whole process. But people question whether it can actually stay there, because if you then dig it up, you'll just lose it back in the atmosphere. There are some funguses that actually turn carbon back into rock, which you can't then immediately release into the atmosphere. I think flooding is a massive issue too. So as Tom said, a good porous structure of soil that's healthy and viable and working can actually sink in and suck in water when we're getting the flooding, and then can hold on to it when we're getting the drought. And that increasingly is going to be important as we see these weather fluctuations happening.
I was really interested in, Tara, what you said about the lack of an evidence base. I know the minister's ears will have pricked up at that, but
so that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's an emerging idea and a movement. So there is inevitably not going to be much of an evidence base. And I think there's a lot of debate at the moment around what counts as evidence as well. So the idea that you're doing a trial and you're doing a controlled trial, and sometimes it's not possible to show kind of replicated results, and then the academics say, you see, look, there aren't the replicated results, and then the farmer's saying, yeah, but everything is so context specific that I know what I'm seeing. So there is a kind of disjuncture in what counts as evidence. I think my kind of point there would be that what I'm really concerned about are the massive claims being made about the sequestration potential, because it is just another techno fix in that respect. And I would say that if I was like Minister for the World, the most important thing I would do, the biggest solution from a kind of farming and food standpoint, is to not convert any more land to agriculture. That is the most important thing. And the second most important thing is to keep carbon in the soil, let alone, don't worry about the sequestering, just keep the carbon in the soil. Do not convert more land. So from grassland to arable, you're going to lead to soil carbon releases. And from trees to arable, same sort of thing. And then so that gets the fact that we have finite land. If you take account that kind of 40% of the Earth's surface is used for food production, that's an astonishing amount. And 3/4 of that 40%, so that's 30% of the Earth's surface, is to rear animals. I think we need to figure out, firstly, how to give some of that back to nature, so that's rewilding, and then how to, what's food for? We're wasting food. 40% of grains are fed to livestock. Think of all the land that is used to produce sugar, stuff that we don't need that makes us sick. We need to think about how to nourish ourselves effectively, and that goes back to Thomasina's point about nutritious ingredients and using the land in order to nourish people. And because there's so much wastage in producing stuff that makes people sick, or that goes to feed animals that we eat. So we just need to think carefully, and yeah.
We haven't talked about food waste either, and the fact we throw a third of the food that we grow away. One of the things that I tried to campaign on in 2015 was on bringing back, making it legal to feed our food waste to livestock again. We established that system of cooking safely all of our food waste, and essentially that pasteurisation of food waste, feeding it back to pork and to chickens, because that is what we've done for thousands of years, and the fact we're not doing that has led to a huge increase in the amount of soy we're feeding to livestock. I think that, coupled with eating less meat, would be a really neat solution. But in any sense, as a minister, I would really urge to look at the amount of food we're wasting and work out a more efficient use for it.
Anything you want to come back on, Tom? Because we're going to open the question to the audience.
Yeah, just very briefly, and I think, you know, we certainly are starting to see a lot more research done. But I would say, and it's, I feel a little bit flippant, but when we're looking back at over millennia, actually we've got examples of carbon buildup, and actually if we're mimicking nature and we're doing a good job of that, we can look at millennia of evidence. Now, we're not doing exactly the same thing, but we can use those principles. It feels a little bit flippant, but that's where we are. But I just wanted to kind of round off for myself. And, you know, the soil is so important. That 6 inches of soil is so important. But actually, it's the top 6 inches in and it's our thinking that's so important. And I think the Green Revolution has lobotomized our farmers into just thinking we'll get the answer from a can. But I think easy food has lobotomized us as if that's even a word, as consumers, into just going for easy, which we've now learned in the last 60 years is not the way to be. So for government, I think education and knowledge exchange is so important, and that helps us to understand better what we're doing. And I think when people get closer to their food, the consumption will change naturally.
Consumption does change.
Getting closer back, yeah.
Does it absolutely changes when you get closer, and children, people say, well, children don't eat vegetables. When they get close to those vegetables, they want to eat them because they are delicious. It definitely, education is important, and convenience has come for all of us at a cost. And I would argue the investment is crazy. So where is our investment in finding the kind of measures that you were talking about and the evidence? We have so little investment in these incredible solutions that are probably there already in the soil. Measure them against the investments we see in precision fermentation that big business investing in, because they hope to co-opt more ultra-processed food in different forms to feed to us at profit. I think we just have to be careful at how we're going to feed us, because a lot of the solutions people are clamouring for are just eating lab foods. And we've seen how that's gone for ultra-processed. And I think we have to be really careful that we don't go that way again.
Let's have some questions from the audience. And I think, Millie, have you got any online questions yet? Or?
I do, yeah. Sorry.
Well, but start with one from you, and then there's one in the audience there. But yeah, Millie.
So we've got loads of different questions, obviously. Right. I'll start with a nice easy one, which came right at the beginning. Tara, you mentioned a book name that you said,
yes.
Thomasina, you mentioned a book name. What was the name of the book?
Merlin Sheldrakes, which I've kind of having a Thomasina moment. You'll probably know the name.
I've read it as well, and I can't remember.
It is called...
Entangled Life.
Yeah, Entangled Life, yeah.
Perfect, that was a nice easy one. I think most of the rest of the questions will obviously spark a bit more debate. So the first one we've got is, how do the panelists see land rights and ownership as a barrier or an opportunity for enabling regenerative farming?
You want to jump in?
I think it's a completely different topic.
But I think it's completely linked. I think the work that Ellen MacArthur Foundation have done, the fact that 80% of calories will be eaten in cities by 2050 is fascinating. And I think the passing of rights to all communities to grow food on the fringes of any cities, I think any future developments, there's a huge one going on in Ladbroke Grove at the moment, and Kensington and Chelsea are running that. It's under their watch. I'm really interested to see what that looks like, whether there's land to grow, because I think in every city people can grow food, and it's in fact a really efficient way to allow people to have access to fresh fruit and vegetables, to fresh ingredients. You can grow a huge amount and be very productive on very small plots of land.
And I think it's really important to get more people back onto the land. I kind of caveat what I've said earlier. There's an organisation called Farm Ed that are just tremendous in terms of stacking what they do, and that's one of the pillars of regenerative farming, is to get more diversity in there. So I think bringing more people back on, I'd love to have more people and more enterprises on my farm, because we'd be able to produce more from the same land area. So,
Millie, I'll come back to you in a minute, but there's a hand there, and a microphone. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alicia Weston. I'm the CEO of Bags of Taste. I'd like to come back to you, Thomasina. I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit difficult here. Yeah. I have to say that I think your sort of comments about people in poverty, we've got chefs that can do this, is a little bit facile in the real context. So we work with 2,500 people a year, and they're all in poverty, are facing a lot of barriers, and we work with them to improve their diets. And they don't have a chef at home to cook for them.
I know this.
And it's not about skills either. It's not that they need to just learn to cook like a chef, because it's really about the social determinants of health.
I completely agree with you. This is why I'm arguing that we need trained chefs in schools, in hospitals, in social care, and in prisons, but we also need social canteens. And throughout Eastern Europe and in some parts of Western Europe, you have great examples of social canteens where you can turn up. 14% of our population don't even have kitchens. So how can you, as a mother who's holding 3 jobs down and don't have even access to food because you live in a food desert and you don't even have a kitchen and you might even live on 17 floors, how can you say to that person, just eat better, cook better? It's impossible. That is why there needs to be a provision for social canteens where some of this skilled workforce, which by the way is completely AI proofed, because as far as I know, robots can't cook good food, as far as I know, because you need places where people from all backgrounds can go on the way back from work and pick up nutritious food. And if you're on a low income, you have some kind of voucher scheme. And that's how, I'm not at all saying that people on incomes just need to learn to cook better and become a chef. What I'm saying is we need more skilled workforce to enable everyone, no matter what your income, to eat better.
So what I would say is that we work with people in their own homes, and we used to work in face-to-face settings. And what I particularly noticed was more than 50% of the people that said that they were interested in our programs wouldn't show up because they actually can't get to these places. So when you're talking about the most vulnerable, they aren't going to go to a social canteen because they've got anxiety, they've got depression, they can't get out of bed, they've got caring responsibilities, they've got a lot of issues.
That's why social care and hospitals hopefully will get to some of those people, and schools.
So So my opinion of what we need to do is really look at some of the social determinants of health, and that needs to be factored into this whole program. I mean, I totally agree with all the things you guys have said, in terms of like the overarching goal is great, but we really risk leaving these people behind and widening health inequalities. And Bags of Taste, the health inequalities organisation, that's what we focus on.
Thank you very much for that point. We'll just try to get as many questions in as possible. Millie, do you want to just jump in with one while we get the microphone there?
Sure. I think this is kind of one for you, Tom. What would you say are the main barriers for farmers in adopting regenerative farming practices?
I think it probably comes back to that point of the top 6 inches. It's for a long time we've thought, not thought very little, but we've had a very kind of A plus B equals C method of farming, and actually adopting these pillars is not something that we can just do. And we do see examples of people saying, well, I reduced our tillage or I bought a new seed drill, and it didn't work. And that's because you're looking at things in isolation. But this is an ecosystem. We're an ecosystem operating with an ecosystem. So I think there is quite a bit of complexity there, and I think it's a lot of it's understanding. So I'd say knowledge exchange is a really key thing. And also, I don't know whether it's the same in your professions, but farmers like to look over the hedge. They want to wait and see somebody they know has done it. And I think that's another thing we really need to be doing is saying, look, here are some people who've done it, and this is how you can do it.
Great question here.
Hi, I'm Prerna, a business owner. I run a food startup into spices, and I work with small farmers who are practicing regenerative agriculture. They're more into traditional and natural farming across origins like Sri Lanka, Madagascar, India, Ghana. One worry in terms of using the word regenerative for me has been when I've been speaking to experts, what they say is that, regenerative farming is not necessarily 100% chemical free. The last resort is to, use chemicals. Is that correct? Just something that has been worrying me, and I go back and forth into using the term or stick to natural farming because that's what my farmers do. So just wanted to check what do you learn about, is using chemicals the last resort?
When I talk to my friends, they say, you're a nice chap, Tom, you must be an organic farmer. And I say, actually, no, but I'm non-binary. Because it's not about being conventional or necessarily organic. For me, it's about using all the tools that I've got in front of me and picking the best solution for the soil, for the crop, for the environment. And one little example of that, which I use frequently, is at the moment, if we had a crop that was besieged with some kind of weed or something where we were going to be struggling to keep the crop, we could use an inter-row hoe, which would pull the weeds out mechanically, or we could potentially use a herbicide. Now, with ground nesting birds on the ground, I'd probably at this time of year favour the herbicide over the inter-row hoe. But what I want to do is make sure that I can make a really responsible and good decision with as many tools I have in front of me. So yes, we're on my farm, as I say, we're in that kind of non-binary space. We're reducing the amount of chemistry that we use, but we're trying to make sure that what the little we do use, we put to greatest effect.
Thank you.
But I would argue that quite a lot of regenerative farmers have, say, a blanket ban on all herbicides, pesticides and fungicides. I think it slightly depends on what spectrum are and whether you're organic, which can be the same.
Organic, but we don't use any insecticides at all, and that was just a principle that we came to.
Yeah.
Question here.
Hi, I'm Mo. I work in the corporate banking sector. I give legal advice, and sometimes I have to deal with occupational health doctors. So I've got two quick questions. Firstly, can we learn anything from Southeast Asia in terms of the way they do their farming practice, in contrast to now implementing new practices here? And my second question is, do you think we've also missed out the fact that there are so many people who are working longer hours, harder than ever before, and therefore their dietary choices are based on their lifestyle? And it isn't just about those who are on low salaries or low income. I've actually come across many people on high salaries who are extremely unhealthy, and that is being steered because they say they have no time, and then what happens is they get all these other, exactly as you were saying, all these different diseases come about, and then when we get these reports, we're told it's because it's linked to their diet. But what I will say about the corporate sector is they try their best to change their kind of food options, which a lot of smaller organisations and charities don't have that luxury of schools. So do you think we're missing that as an education point?
Okay, so one question about Southeast Asian practices and farming and cultivation and food.
I can take that very quickly. I think it's 2023. I think we can learn from practices all over the world. And the sixth pillar that I didn't mention, I said there was five, but there's six. The sixth one is context, because you've got to take those pillars and make it work where you are. So yeah, we can learn from Southeast Asia, absolutely. But we can learn from all over the world.
And lifestyles? People who are too busy to eat well?
Yeah, I mean, we have a our environment is saturated with food, and you're too busy to eat well. Perhaps you have too much leisure time, and therefore you're too depressed to eat well. I mean, there are many reasons, and there's always going to be an unhealthy solution being pushed in your face. So I think it's kind of horses for courses there.
But actually, one of the factors in this country is that our house prices are so high, our rental income is so high. It takes up a huge proportion of our incomes. So I think that is quite prohibitive. People are kind of get onto the rat race of working harder to pay for their high rents. But also the proportion of money that we spend on food is the lowest. I think someone said it was the second lowest in the world. We have the second cheapest food in the world, and we spend definitely the smallest proportion in Europe on our food. So I do think there's a question of culture and how important food is to you. And I do think it's really interesting when we start looking at the 4-day working week, at how AI is going to take a lot of our jobs from us. Maybe that will enable us to actually start growing some food in our back gardens, preparing it ourselves, going to a farmer's market and building that into our leisure time. For me, going to a farmer's market is pleasure. I have the money to be able to do that. But I think lots of people don't see that as a leisure time action.
And for full disclosure, last week on average, I spent 5 hours and 31 minutes on my phone each day.
Wow. Who's looking after the farm?
That's because we've got satellite guidance.
Okay, right. Millie, question from the audience, and then there's a gentleman with his hand up there, if we can.
Yeah, sure.
And then, but that's probably it. So 3 more questions. Yeah.
I've got one from Chris Payne, who asks, do you think it's necessary to overcome the current reluctance of our government to be seen as impacting upon individual choices in this space? Very curious about how you might go about reframing this relationship.
Yeah. We have very little individual choice in our purchasing decisions. We've already had a speaker from the back talking about the socio-economic determinants of health. Those pretty much shape many of our food choices. we live in a world where, like, planning policy dictates your food choices. I've got about 5 fried chicken shops on my high street. We have the kind of the timings and the routines of the day where you go, and if you do go to physical meetings anymore, there are usually biscuits and all the rest of it. We have the kind of the Starbucks and the Costa phenomenon where, you know, we've moved from having a small cup of coffee to a large cup of frothy milk. Again, it's more calories, it's more sugar, it's all the rest of it. Like, where is the choice? We have advertising. It's the required kind of leisure pastime now, eating, and that can be for good, but it can also be for bad. It's kind of taken up a disproportionate part of our life. So the idea that I, as an individual, my choices are a consequence of my education, my upbringing, my income, where I live, my family environment, and all the rest of it, where the autonomy there is very, very limited.
I think we need to start looking at ultra-processed food as carcinogenic, as in it's an addictive substance. It doesn't do us any good. It causes us harm, and we should start legislating for it. Just as we tackled the tobacco industry, we need to start seeing it as addictive and unhealthy and start legislating around it, because and having public warning, because a lot of these foods, I would argue with Tom actually about his, you know, it's very easy to label what ultra-processed is. It normally has an emulsifier, has added sugar, and we know that it's doing us harm, and we know it's addictive because it's built to be addictive, plus 20 billion pounds a year is spent on advertising these foods to children and teenagers, often through their smartphones. We have to treat it like tobacco.
So the minister has to prove that they're not.
Two more very pithy questions.
Hello, I'm David Sharp. I've spent the last 9.5 years at Ocado using robots and AI to distribute food, and I've just joined Kaikaku as their CTO to use robots and AI to create and cook and make exciting food. So I'm very excited to hear that you haven't done it yet with robots, and maybe you could share a vision of if we can use robots and AI for food, what would we create?
What's your company?
It's called Kaikaku, which is radical innovation in Japanese.
Oh, interesting. So what are you cooking?
Well, I should be asking you.
Wow.
Exactly.
We'll talk
Maybe there
later.
should be a new chain of these wonderful vegetable restaurants that you're talking about.
How many robots do you employ while you're looking at your mobile phone?
Well, apart from all the kind of satellite guidance and that kind of thing, this autumn we're due to have the first robots which will scan per plant, work 24 hours a day, and they will identify in a field of 35 million plants. Will identify this is a clover plant, this is a wheat plant, this is a blackgrass plant, and we'll present that back to us. So we can cut down on 97% of the chemicals that we use because we can be that specific. But that's
it's a slightly
technology's here.
Aspect of AI.
But very exciting.
I just want to get this final question here. If we can get a microphone over here. Oh, there we go.
Hello, John Wiltshire from Smithery. Thank you for this. It's fascinating. The Minister is very enthused and fascinated in supporting this, but is conscious that another minister down the corridor was signing some trade deals recently. How can the Minister protect this idea in Britain in the context of those trade deals if they are still in place?
The joy of the proposal is we're using public procurement to harness the powers and have that pull effect. So I think by setting some clear parameters and frameworks for it, we can really use this, the 2.4 billion we already spend on food to buy better food, and hopefully have a bit of extra investment, maybe from our health pot, into exactly how we can invest more in better farming, but also better food systems. And I would definitely argue, to the question in the back there, that we need free access to food in all schools, free school meals for all. Because in this country, currently, as a household, if you earn over £7,400, you're deemed rich enough to feed your own children.
Now, Minister, you've been presented to all evening, but now it's the time to make up your mind, and we're going to ask you to use futurology, the futurology of a mobile phone. So you should be able to see a QR code there. If you can point your mobile phone at the QR code on the screen, That will take you to a poll. Has anybody managed to do that yet? Yeah, okay, excellent. So you've got three choices, and I'll just read them out. The first is that you're going to support regenerative farming, legislate that by 2035, 50% of the food procured should be farmed through regenerative means. Your second choice is to move fast and legislate that by 2030, 50% of the food procured should be farmed through regenerative means. Or you can cop out. You can take a different path and use other means to tackle the health, environmental and security issues around food, such as technology. So if you can each choose one of those, and I think Borndale's going to put the, we're completely blindsided here, but is this working or not? Yes, great, because otherwise I'm going to have to get you to, so somebody tell me what the result is.
Maybe Alex would help.
It's moving. Ooh, very exciting.
In the poll, but we're currently a majority for moving fast. So the proposal, but faster, with just over a quarter on the original proposal and 12% at the moment on tackling via other means.
So what's the majority for moving fast?
Moving fast.
Moving faster, in fact, faster than the proposal.
Faster. Is what?
63%.
63% for the second option.
For moving fast
Wow.
and 24 for the
For-
original proposal.
Well, I think that's very decisive, Minister. Thank you very much. Brave, Minister, if I may say so.
Good idea, of yours, Minister.
Well, look, that's been a fascinating evening. I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank these brilliant speakers for giving out the evening. Thank you, Nesta, for all that you've done in terms of collaborating here, coming along tonight, and in terms of making this evening so interesting. Those of you who are devotees of feedback forms, you will find, where will you find? You'll access on the screen, or there's there's a link in the chat box. Does that mean anything? Because we haven't got...
There'll be
Yeah.
some QR codes for in-person people to scan.
Right, okay, very good, okay. The next ministerial discussion is on July the 13th. Winner takes all, how to open up tech monopolies, and that's with James Plunkett. And the only thing that remains for us all to do is to go upstairs and hit the drink. And there are canopies upstairs, and continue the conversation. So thank you very much.